a 10-year-old boy, weighing only 40 pounds, covered in bruises, burns, and scars from years of abuse. He was starving, suffering, and enduring unimaginable pain at the hands of those who were supposed to protect him. When his mother called 911, she claimed he had simply fallen. But by the time paramedics arrived, Anthony Avalos was already unconscious. His small body showed signs of extreme distress, malnourished, dehydrated. His veins had collapsed. Emergency personnel had to drill into his tibia just to administer fluids, but it was too late. This was no accident. This was the tragic result of years of cruelty and neglect. His mother, Heather Barron, and her boyfriend, Kareem Lever, didn't just fail him, they tortured him. Anthony endured more than just physical abuse. He was starved, forced to kneel on uncooked rice for hours, locked away, and punished for seeking help. But what's even more horrifying, the system had countless chances to save him and did nothing. Teachers, neighbors, even strangers reported the abuse. Calls were made, reports were filed, yet no one acted in time. This case isn't just about the monsters who hurt Anthony. It's about a system that ignored every warning sign until it was too late. What do you think about this heartbreaking story? Share your thoughts in the comments, leave a like, and subscribe so more people can hear the truth. Now, let's dive into the full story.
Anthony Nolan Avalos, born on May 4, 2008, in Los Angeles, California, was the eldest of 6 siblings. A boy full of love, laughter, and dreams, Anthony should have been living a life of endless possibilities. Instead, his reality was shaped by a cycle of neglect and abuse. His favorite things were simple: a love for the Dallas Cowboys, a passion for dancing, and pupusas, a comfort food his mother Heather would lovingly make for him. But as much as Anthony filled his life with joy, the world around him was far from stable. Heather Maxine Barron, a young mother, struggled to make ends meet. She worked part-time at Subway, doing her best to provide for her children. But the pressure was overwhelming. It wasn't easy. Victor Avalos, Anthony's father, was there at the start. But after Anthony's birth, he left for Mexico to work, staying in touch with video calls, but physically absent from his son's life. This left Heather to raise Anthony and his 5 younger siblings alone, and without the stability that Victor's presence could have offered. But Heather's challenges weren't just financial. Her partner, Kareem Lever, a violent gang member with a history of abuse, entered the picture. Kareem's presence in their home would mark a turning point in Anthony's life, one that would slowly turn from love to fear. Kareem, with his violent background, brought danger into their home. What should have been a safe space for Anthony became a place where fear lived. Kareem wasn't just a man who had a past. He was now a daily threat to the family, especially to Anthony. With his abusive tendencies, the home became a battlefield, and Anthony, full of energy and love, had no idea what was coming. Victor may have tried to stay connected from a distance, but as much as he cared, he couldn't protect his son from the turmoil growing in the home. And despite Heather's love, the choices she made and the people she allowed into their lives would forever change Anthony's path. What should have been a normal childhood filled with joy and dreams was shattered, and the consequences would be devastating. The love, the warmth, everything Anthony needed to grow was slipping away, and no one seemed to notice until it was too late. It all began when Anthony was just 4 years old, an age when the world should have been full of wonder and innocence. But for him, it wasn't. He told his mother something that no child should ever have to speak aloud, that a family member had touched him inappropriately, a moment that should have been a wake-up call, a moment that should have changed everything. His mother, Heather, took him to a health clinic, thinking it was the first step to protect him. But despite Anthony's brave disclosure and the physical evidence to back it up, nothing happened. This was only the beginning of a series of reports to CPS, each one more desperate than the last, but with no real intervention or lasting protection. The system failed him. Again. Heather's own life was steeped in darkness, a tragic backstory that still could not justify her poor choices. Her mother abandoned her at the age of 4, leaving her to navigate life's cruel twists without guidance or love. Heather's childhood was marked by pain. Her stepfather, Roger Brown, a violent ex-convict, inflicted years of abuse on her and her sister. The scars from this abuse were deep and lasting, but Heather's belief that her own suffering made her immune to harm would set the stage for the tragedy that would unfold. Despite the torment she had endured, Heather made the choice to leave Anthony in Roger's care. Convinced that he wouldn't hurt him, thinking his preference for girls over boys meant Anthony was safe. That misplaced trust would become her biggest mistake and Anthony's nightmare. In 2014, Heather's own sister, Crystal, witnessed firsthand the horror Anthony was living through. She reported to authorities that Anthony was being beaten, locked in rooms for hours with no food or access to a bathroom, but once again, it was dismissed as a low-risk case. Instead of removing Anthony from the dangerous home, he remained trapped in the very environment that was destroying him. Anthony's case was evaluated by therapists and counselors. One of the recommendations made was for Anthony to receive professional therapeutic support due to the severe emotional and physical abuse he had endured. His behavior, the trauma he had suffered, and the signs of psychological distress were all clear indicators that he needed more than just temporary visits from social workers. Yet despite this recommendation, nothing substantial was done. DCFS caseworkers, who had already dropped the ball on previous interventions, failed to ensure that Anthony was enrolled in the appropriate therapy or placed into a safe environment where he could begin to heal. Instead, the case was treated as low risk, shocking given the extent of the abuse Anthony had already revealed to multiple authorities. He needed therapy to cope with what was happening at home, but instead he was left in the same abusive environment, enduring more torment as time went on. By 2015, the abuse had reached terrifying new heights, and Anthony's life was slipping further out of his control. His uncle, David Barron, was the first to confront the terrifying reality of what was happening in Heather's home. When the kids confided in him about the physical violence they were enduring, being locked in rooms, beaten with belts, and forced to kneel on uncooked rice, David knew something had to be done. He couldn't stand by anymore. He physically blocked Heather from taking the children and immediately called 911. But as had become all too familiar, the system failed again. Despite the reports and the mounting evidence of abuse, nothing changed. Anthony remained trapped in the home where fear and cruelty ruled. And at the heart of it all was Kareem Leva, Heather's boyfriend. With a history of violent relationships, Kareem's presence in the home only fueled the abuse. He wasn't just a passive bystander in the cruelty. He became an active participant. Reports surfaced of him violently grabbing one of the children by the ear, leaving bruises. But once again, the police and DCFS dismissed these reports as unsubstantiated. The people who were supposed to protect Anthony simply turned a blind eye. The abuse was suffocating him, and yet in the midst of all the horror, there was still a glimmer of light. One teacher, Harmony Bell, noticed him. She was the one person who made him feel safe, who showed him kindness when the world had turned cold. It was with her that Anthony found the only peace in his young life. The moments he spent in her classroom were his brief respite from the nightmare at home. But as time went on, even that was no longer enough. As his days became darker, Anthony did something that would reveal his heart. He wrote a letter. His letter wasn't just a goodbye. It was an act of love, a plea for connection, a small moment of light amidst so much darkness. The letter he wrote read, "Dear Mrs. Bell, thank you for teaching me everything you could. It was such a blessing to meet you. I just hope that when I go to 6th grade, you can come to New Vista so I can see you still. I hope that you can come to my high school, middle school, and college so we can see each other for school years without a problem because how close we are and how we are best buddies and friends. I just want to stay with you forever, but I can't. I just hope you have a good rest of your life because you already know that I'm going to have a good life. Love, Anthony Avalos." Anthony's words, written with a purity that only a child could have, showed his longing for something simple, human connection. He didn't know how much longer he had, but he clung to the idea that there were still people who cared about him. But it was too late. His world was crumbling, and despite his efforts, no one was able to stop the nightmare. In the end, the boy who should have been dreaming of his future, of school dances, high school, and a world full of potential, was tragically silenced. The system had failed him. His family had failed him, and even the people who could have stopped it failed him. Then came June 18th, 2018. According to his mother, Anthony allegedly confided in her that he liked boys, a confession that, if true, should have been dealt with carefully. But instead, it was used as an excuse for the horrific violence that followed. Heather Barron claimed this moment triggered a brutal outburst from her boyfriend, Kareem Leva. And whether or not Anthony actually made the confession, what happened next was undeniable. His abuse escalated. The following day, the violence took on a new intensity. Anthony, already battered by years of mistreatment, was dropped on his head multiple times. Each time, his fragile body absorbed the brutal impact. He was whipped with belts, subjected to further burns from hot sauce, and tortured in ways that no child should ever endure. His small frame could barely withstand the abuse, but it continued. His body became a canvas for cruelty, unrelenting, unyielding, and ignored. By June 20th, 2018, Anthony's body was broken. His once vibrant spirit was crushed under the weight of years of neglect and violence. Heather made a 911 call, claiming that Anthony had fallen. But when paramedics arrived, the reality was far worse than a simple fall. Anthony's body, malnourished and unrecognizable, showed the true extent of his suffering. He was rushed to the hospital, but despite their best efforts, it was too late. Anthony Nolan Avalos was pronounced dead on June 21st, 2018, at just 10 years old. In the end, the people who should have protected him, the ones who were supposed to care for him, were the ones responsible for ending his life. Anthony's tragic death wasn't just the loss of a child. It was the failure of every system that was meant to keep him safe. And even after he was gone, the need for justice only grew stronger. After Anthony's death, investigators uncovered a nightmare hidden in plain sight. Blood stains on the carpet, locks on the children's bedroom doors. Things that should never have been part of a child's world. But there they were, undeniable signs of years of torment. Under a piece of loose carpet, they found a pile of uncooked rice, just like the children had described. The evidence confirmed the abuse that had been ignored for so long. It wasn't a single incident. It was a pattern of cruelty. When Heather Barron was interrogated, her behavior mirrored that of another notorious abuser, Pearl Fernandez, the mother involved in the tragic case of Gabriel Fernandez. Heather tried to control the narrative, deflecting blame and refusing to acknowledge the horrors she had caused. The manipulation was chilling, and it made one thing clear. She wasn't just a passive participant in this nightmare. She was a key player. As the trial unfolded, Anthony's siblings, Destiny and Raphael, were forced to relive the horror they had witnessed. They spoke up with courage, detailing the abuse they endured and the terrifying things they saw. Forced to fight each other for entertainment, locked away for hours and punished for the smallest infractions, these were just some of the ways Heather and Kareem made their lives a living hell. Their testimony was raw, emotional, and heartbreaking. Each word painted a picture of the cruelty Anthony suffered daily, a life marked by constant fear, pain, and isolation. It was a story of betrayal by the people who were supposed to protect him, and it left the courtroom in stunned silence as the reality of Anthony's last days came into focus. In March 2019, the jury found Heather Barron and Kareem Leva guilty of first-degree murder and torture. The case had drawn national attention, and the expectation was that both would face the death penalty. But in a controversial move, Los Angeles County District Attorney George Gascon, under his new policy against capital punishment, opted for life sentences without parole instead. In April 2023, both Heather and Kareem were sentenced to spend the rest of their lives in prison, paying the price for their unspeakable actions. But for Anthony's family, justice felt hollow. No sentence could bring him back or undo the years of pain he had endured. The trial wasn't just about the conviction. It was about exposing the failure of the systems that allowed this abuse to continue unchecked. It was about giving Anthony a voice in the courtroom, a chance to be heard even though he couldn't speak for himself anymore. And it was about holding accountable those who should have protected him. In the wake of Anthony's death, his family didn't just grieve, they fought. They fought for justice, not only for Anthony, but for every child failed by the system meant to protect them. His family took to the streets, organizing protests and advocating for the changes they believed would prevent more tragedies like Anthony's. They rallied against District Attorney George Gascon's decision not to pursue the death penalty for Heather and Kareem, feeling that justice had been robbed of Anthony. Their voices were loud, their fight relentless, but their aim was bigger than just retribution. It was about holding the system accountable, shining a spotlight on the flaws in child protective services that allowed the abuse to continue unchecked for so long. The pain of losing Anthony fueled their mission, and they used it to push for the reforms that had been so desperately needed. The Avalos family's tireless fight for justice led to a significant moment. Los Angeles County, in light of the case's exposure of deep systemic failures, awarded the family a $32 million settlement. The county acknowledged its role in failing to protect Anthony, and that money was intended to hold the system accountable. But for Anthony's family, no amount of money could bring him back or ease the unimaginable loss they felt. The settlement, though substantial, was a stark reminder that there was no price that could make up for a life cut short, for the years that Anthony could have had, for the future he was denied. On July 20th, 2018, Anthony was laid to rest at St. Junipero Serra Parish in Quartz Hills, California. The community that had failed him in life came together to mourn his loss. At his funeral, the headstone that marked his grave read, "You don't have to have superpowers to be a superhero," a bittersweet tribute to a boy who, despite everything, had been full of love and life. Anthony, a little boy who never stood a chance in his own home, was now a hero. A hero remembered not for how he died, but for the love he shared and the way he fought to survive every single day. A boy who should have had the chance to grow up, to dream, to love, and to live. One more chance that was taken from him too soon. The moral questions raised by Anthony's case are impossible to ignore. Could his life have been saved if the system had acted sooner? Why were so many calls for help ignored? Why did those responsible for his care, the ones who should have protected him, continue to harm him without consequence? This case leaves us with more questions than answers. It's a haunting reminder that every child who suffers at the hands of abuse is a child we failed. The need for reform is undeniable. The time for action is now. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Anthony's case. What do you think about how it was handled by the authorities? Do you believe more could have been done to intervene before it was too late? And how do you think we can better advocate for children who have no voice, for those in our communities who are often overlooked? If you haven't yet, consider joining our True Crime membership. We pour so much heart into each story, hoping to shed light on the cases that matter most and bring justice to those who've been silenced. Be sure to check out the other videos on this channel, where we tackle these cases with respect and dedication. Thanks so much for your support. I can't wait to read your thoughts in the comments. See you soon.